Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parshat class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Malo Dumim in Israel. The word enthusiasm has a curious history. Originally, it meant something like infused with the Spirit of God. The word itself contains this meaning, with the Greek word for God, theos, buried almost unnoticeable in the middle. It retained this meaning for millennia, right up to around the 17th or 18th century. At some point around then, it acquired a somewhat derogatory meaning, similar to fanatic. It referred to people who got carried away with their fervor for a given cause, religious or otherwise. It was only in relatively recent centuries that it gained its newer meaning of one who is eager and passionate about something in a manner that exudes confidence and energy among those around them. It no longer carries any connotations about being infused with the Spirit of God, but it still means the person has something particularly spirited about them. This change in meaning really parallels the changes in the meaning of the word spirit. In ancient times, it meant something like breath, since the air we breathe was believed to be infused with a unique spirit which gave us life. This meaning was expanded to include all manner of spiritual beings, such as angels and even deities. There was, of course, the possibility of evil spirits, such as demons and ghosts, and whatever dark elements they introduced into life. In more recent years, it has come to be almost synonymous with enthusiasm, as it is used to describe someone with extra energy for whatever it needs doing. The evolution of both of these words reflects a fascinating change between ancient times and modern times. Back in the good old days, many fundamental aspects of life were considered to be non-physical and belonging to a dimension of reality that was not quite on the same plane as the normal reality of dirt and rocks. The air itself was a kind of transitional phase between the two realities. The spiritual world was just as real as the real world. In fact, for many, it was more real, in that it was where everything of importance really took place. But modern thinking, influenced by science and materialism, has forced many of us to dismiss all of that as nonsense. Everything spiritual, including God and the soul, had to be thrown into the dustbin of superstition, or at least questioned to the point that nobody would want to admit believing in such things in a university setting. Consequently, enthusiasm means being emotionally charged about something, and spirit means that contagious feeling of really wanting to be part of something. There is no longer anything really spiritual about either of these words. They are just really desirable emotional states. In a way, it is too bad that we have largely lost this innate connection to spirituality in our daily lives. Imagine what life could be like if we truly believed that every time we breathed, we were imbibing some divine spiritual essence within ourselves. What if we somehow considered the thoughts and the ideas that sprang up into our minds as the result of visitations from something beyond the realm of the physical and the mundane, but more like a bridge between us and the world of God? Granted, some of this would lead to craziness and wild thoughts, but we still have plenty of that today without attributing our thoughts to God or some spiritual source. At least we would recognize and believe that there was more to life than atoms and pixels. This was the way things were until about 4 or 5 centuries ago. It changed considerably over that long span of centuries between ancient times and pre-modern times. But on the whole, there was a strong element of the spiritual in all aspects of life. It is possible that we cannot go back to those days, since once lost, the spiritual may not really be able to be recovered. Every step we take in the direction of AI probably seals off this aspect of life from us. But who knows? Maybe AI will somehow breathe new life into what it writes off as superstitious nonsense that no computer would be caught dead admitting to. This week's Parsha is called Baha'alotcha. That long word means in your bringing up. Like many Parshas, the title really has very little to do with the content. It happens to introduce a couple of verses dealing with Aaron's task of lighting the candles on the menorah in the Mishkan. The first section of the Parsha deals with the assorted tasks of the Levites in the Mishkan and the rituals they had to go through to be inaugurated into their service. Next, it gets into the first Pesach in the wilderness. That this puts things into a firmer perspective in terms of time. We are 1 year after the Exodus. The first Pesach is observed, complete with an option of a second round 1 month later for those who were unable to commemorate Pesach at the correct time because of some ritual impurity. Following this, there is a long section dealing with the directions for the huge encampment to move on in the wilderness. This would be the first time the Israelites left the region of Mount Sinai, around which they had been dwelling for about 10 months. The journeys were to be signaled by the mysterious cloud, which was always around, moving on and then stopping somewhere. There was also an audible system of trumpets to indicate to everyone that it was time to move or time to stop. The first journey takes place with all the various tribes moving according to their position around the Mishkan. Then the Ark of the Covenant moved, which itself was a monumental event. But almost immediately after they left Mount Sinai, there were problems and complaints. Some of these problems are a bit vague, but others clearly deal with issues concerning food. They wanted meat and fish and all kinds of other things that they no longer had access to. This was the beginning of the great journey to the land of Israel, and the Israelites had no idea that they wouldn't reach there for another 39 years. The food complaints centered around the man, or the manna, which at first was a greatly appreciated gift from Hashem, but had since become more boring and routine. Even Moshe was worn out by these complaints. He himself complained to Hashem that he couldn't bear the burden of the people by himself. He needed help and had no avenue to turn to other than Hashem. Hashem told him to gather 70 elders who were trusted and acknowledged to be leaders of the people. He was to position these elders in such a way that Hashem would descend and speak to him, and some of the spirit that was on Moshe would somehow be placed upon them. With this element of the spirit of Moshe upon them, these elders would then help Moshe out in bearing some of the burdens of the people. The people were meanwhile promised an excess of quail to more than satisfy their desire for meat. They would get a month's worth until they were sick of it. Moshe questioned how such a vast amount of food could be provided. Hashem's response to Moshe was to question his belief in the power of Hashem. While this was happening, that spirit from Moshe emanated onto the elders. The result of this was an unexpected overflow of prophetic insight. Even Moshe's trusted servant, Yehoshua, was alarmed at this and felt that Moshe should lock these people up before they did any serious harm. Moshe's reply to this was, quote, "If only all the people of Hashem were prophets, that Hashem would put some of his spirit upon them." Let's examine this scene a little closer. Moshe told Hashem that he could no longer cope with the problems the Israelites were presenting to him once the journey started up again. It was too much for any one person, even one as great and as spiritual as Moshe, to handle. The sign of Moshe having reached the extent of his abilities was his questioning of Hashem's power to supply food for this massive group of people in the middle of the desert. Not that this was a readily believable thing, but it was not within the character of Moshe to question such a promise. Hashem's response to Moshe was to allow the transference of some of the spirit that was on Moshe to fall onto these 70 elders. This would allow these other people to share the burden of attending to the people's complaints and everything else, along with Moshe. All of this happened, and then these elders began prophesying to the alarm of Moshe's servant Yehoshua. Moshe's response to that was that this was a good thing. The more Israelite prophets, the better. There are many questions on this incident. How is spirit transferred from one person to another? Even if God is involved, how does it happen? Why can't Hashem simply add more spirit and put it on those other people without transferring it from Moshe? Why did this transference of spirit result in this spontaneous round of prophecy? Why was Yehoshua alarmed by this? And why did Moshe tell him that it was what he really wanted to begin with? There is a simple answer to all of these questions. The spirit was enthusiasm, but in the ancient sense of the word. It really meant some spiritual energy going from one person to another. Even today, enthusiasm is somewhat contagious. There is something real to that energy that cannot be measured with a meter, but exists nevertheless. It may not require God in order to be transferred, but God can certainly make it happen. Spirit is like the breath of God. It is energy that comes from a divine source, but there is only so much of it going around at any given time. More than this, and things may get out of hand. This was what alarmed Yehoshua. He didn't want there to be an overflow of this spiritual energy, which might result in another golden calf-like catastrophe. Prophecy doesn't necessarily mean predicting the future, but it does mean having some insight into the deeper and more spiritual aspect of reality. This is powerful stuff, and it has to be handled with care. But Moshe reassured him that everything was going according to plan. This was the way Hashem intended things to be. That spirit was never meant to be the exclusive property of any one person. It was meant to be shared by all. The spiritual enthusiasm that arises from a person truly being aware of the presence of God, wherever and whenever they may be, is the true goal of all humanity. That we get distracted with false positives and overwhelmed with the power of a genuine experience is due to our own shortcomings. But we were meant to share that enthusiasm and to have it spread to others. It is truly a spirit which originates from a divine source, and it is ours for the taking. But we have to be prepared to accept it for what it is and willing to share it with others. Shabbat Shalom.